Hey there. In this video, I'm going to be talking about how there was a moment in a synagogue where I genuinely thought I might die. So this is clearly a more serious video. It's not like a funny, silly video. And I guess my two purposes with giving this story is to tell the story, to give my anecdotal experience, and to preface a little bit with some explanation about who I am, I guess, and also to give a little bit of an address regarding my frustration with the rise in anti-Semitism and why it really matters to me personally. To start out with prefacing a little bit, I was not born a Jew. I was not raised in a Jewish household. I do not have Jewish parents. My upbringing was as a Gentile. I was raised as a Gentile. So Gentile, I didn't know what that word meant. I was secular. I had some extended family who were Roman Catholic, who had some influence on me, but my immediate family was secular. And so early in my youth, I was pretty much agnostic. And I had some mild Christian affinity, but I was pretty much agnostic and secular, and I was more interested in science, and I didn't think about Christianity all that much, other than the few things my grandmother had taught me. Early in my teenage years, I was somebody who was, if not explicitly atheist, I was very, very pridefully agnostic, very confidently agnostic, and very critical of religion in general. But at some point in my teenage years, I became pretty intellectually serious about religion and about God, and I came to believe that there was a God, that there was some kind of tri-omni deity. I didn't know who it was. I didn't know that it was the triune God. I almost had what you could call a philosopher's God, where I postulated that there was some kind of creator who existed and who had power over me, but I didn't have an identity for them. There wasn't a series of revelation in the world that I could tie to them and say, this is their action in my history. I had a blank slate of believing in God. At first, my first religious commitment and first identity within religion and worldview that I took on within religion really would have been Roman Catholicism. I turned to it largely because it had proximity to me. I had family who were already Roman Catholic, and to me it almost would have been an act of humility to accept what was given to me and what was close to me as my first place for learning. Over time, though, I came to fall out of Roman Catholicism due to a number of things. I had developed some personal issues with Roman Catholic doctrine, which I do not believe are very important to articulate in this video. But over time as a Catholic, I had developed a very deep interest in Judaism, and I had become familiar with apologists for Judaism, like Rabbi Tovia Singer, who also do work in they do what they call anti-missionary work, where they articulate why they believe Christianity is in fact not a true religion. And that was a space and a movement that I had fallen into and that I was a part of for a good chunk of time, where I came to reject Christianity because I believed that Christianity contradicted the Bible. I thought that it wasn't true, and I thought that Judaism was more intellectually coherent. And regardless of how you feel about that, regardless of whether or not you thought I was wise in that decision, that would have been how I, with a Gentile upbringing, would have come into Judaism. And I feel it's pretty important to preface for this video the concept of a Jew and a Noahide within Judaism, because it may make the story make a little bit more sense. But within Judaism, a lot of people will say that Judaism is a particularist religion. It's not a universal religion. And to some extent, that is true. a Judaist who is a Jew does not believe that somebody who is not Jewish needs to become Jewish in order to fulfill what their calling on this world is from the standpoint of Judaism. Jews believe that Jews, who they see as the people Israel, as the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they have a particular calling and particular set of obligations, which is codified in the 613 mitzvot, the 613 commandments given at the Sinai revelation for the congregation of Israel, the nation of Israel, the Jewish people. Starting with the 10 commandments, then there's 603 more after that. And then universally for mankind, it's thought that there are 7 laws, those 7 laws codifying the instructions that were given to Adam and his descendants, and the instructions which were given to Noah and his descendants, which are the commandments for all mankind. So it's important to understand that in Judaism, if you believe in Judaism, but you are born a Gentile, you're not born into the Jewish tribal community, you aren't obligated to do things like not eat pork. You aren't obligated to do things like do the 3 daily liturgical prayers. You aren't obligated to do things like keep the Sabbath as would a Jew. But it is absolutely possible for somebody who is a Jew and somebody who believes in Judaism, somebody who's a Gentile, somebody who believes in Judaism, in order for them to become a Jew, that is possible. They can undergo a process of conversion in order to become Jewish, and this is understood as being biblical. The ancestor of King David, Ruth, was born a Moabite, yet she became an Israelite. There's a precedent for conversion from being a Gentile to a Jew in the Bible. Also, it's said that a mixed multitude came out of Egypt, so that there were Egyptians with the Israelites, but at Sinai they would have converted into being Israelites. They're called the Erev Rav. But I just feel that this prefacing is pretty important for establishing that there's a difference between being a Jew and being somebody who believes in and affirms Judaism. I had come to identify with the Noahide movement as I was a Gentile who came to intellectually believe in Judaism, and I had a serious faith in Jewish doctrine. But I had a very real desire to become a Jew. I didn't just want to be a Judaist, I wanted to be somebody who was Jewish. I wanted to attach myself to the Jewish law. And so because of that, there was a synagogue I attended. It's not officially affiliated with any movement. It is split between a conservative Jewish community and a Reformed Jewish community, and it's important to understand those are denominational terms. They're not political terms. When I say conservative Jew, I don't mean somebody who's politically conservative. And this synagogue was somewhere that I had been to several times before. But on this particular day, on September 24th, 2022, I had gone to synagogue with the intention of, after the service, going to speak to the rabbi and talking to him about beginning a conversion process, because I wanted to become Jewish. And so this was a Saturday morning service, and I arrived fairly early, and I was told about how earlier in the day, not too long before the service was starting, but before I had arrived, there was a man who had shown up in a cowboy hat who was let in by mistake. There was a woman who was there at the synagogue at the time, and she mistook the man in the cowboy hat for a Jewish congregant who also happens to wear a cowboy hat. And she let him in, and he was sort of abrasive, and he was saying, he was insistent on seeing the rabbi. He wanted to see the rabbi. And when he was told the rabbi wasn't there, he kind of just left. And as people were coming in for the service, there was a little bit of discussion about this. There was a little bit of mild concern among the congregation, but it seemed, mostly fine. We didn't know that anything was going to happen. And on this particular day, it was asked if I could check the door if anybody came while services were going, because the doors were locked and you had to be let in. And I had heard a buzzing at the door, so I got up from my pew and went to go let the person in. But as I walked out of the sanctuary and into the lobby area, I looked at the door, and the first thing I saw was a cowboy hat, and that immediately, that signaled in my head that, this was the person that, there was a bit of concern about earlier. There was a bit of a fuss with. So I went back into the sanctuary, and I went to speak to the Jew who wears a cowboy hat that the lady before had mistaken this intruder for. He also happened to be the head of security, and he's, the security personnel for the synagogue. And I had gone to him and I said, there's a guy with a cowboy hat at the door. I think you should go handle that, basically. And, I didn't know what was going to happen, but he got up and he went to the door, and I was just sitting in the sanctuary. And to my surprise, I watched both of them walk into the sanctuary together. I was sitting near the exit where you enter into the sanctuary. I was pretty aware of it happening. Everybody else in the room was pretty aware also, but the service was just going on as normal. There was no real disruption. The man just came in. And, he ended up just the intruder who came in wearing the cowboy hat. He ended up sitting down in one of the pews, and he was, relaxed. He was leaning back on the pew, sticking both of his arms out behind him, just looking totally relaxed. And I remember him saying, we've got a bunch of spies in here, while the service was going on, while people were praying, while there was music being played. I can't remember exactly how long this duration of time was, but the service was just going on as normal. He said, we've got a bunch of spies in here, and he started getting up, walking around. He was kind of moseying around the back of the sanctuary like he owned the place. And I remember there was an elderly Jewish couple sitting closer to the front of the sanctuary. And these are people who I really respect. And the elderly man, he came up out of the pew, and he went and he was kindly offering a siddur, a Jewish prayer book to the man, even though he was, saying these things and being disrespectful and sort of just walking around disorderly during the service. And I don't remember exactly what he said, but as the elderly man was handing him the siddur, he said something charged to him, negative and assertive and authoritative towards him. And I remember him sitting back down. He sat back down in his pew, and he was acting all relaxed again. And he just started, he picked up his hand, and he just started pointing at each Jew in the room. And he just started counting them out loud. The service still just going on. He starts counting everybody out loud. 1 spy, 2 spies, 3 spies. And he got to me, and he pointed his finger at me. And it was a stern point at me. He said 8. And then he got to 9. And he said, yep, we've got 9 spies in here. And to me, this just struck tension through me like lightning. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew this was not behavior coming from somebody who was coming in peace. And something that really struck my soul, that really struck my mind, was that I was not even a Jew. I was a Gentile. I had come here that day to, out of interest in beginning the long process of becoming a Jew. But in that moment, in that man's perception, it did not matter what my technical identity was, what my covenant status was, what my standing with the Jewish community was. He had labeled me, he had branded me as a Jew, and that made me a spy to him. That made me an infiltrator. That made me an enemy to him. And so for the first time in my life, as somebody who was a Gentile, as somebody who was not firmly rooted in Jewish identity, I had felt deep anxiety and fear over being Jewish, and I wasn't even a Jew. And, it was right after he had counted me as 8 and then said 9, yep, we've got 9 spies in here. Survival instinct kicked in, and the smart thing to do was to get out of the sanctuary. I should not have been in there. I had to get out. So I got up out of my pew and I just started marching out. And I got about halfway through the lobby to the doors to exit, and I sort of just froze. I sort of froze in place, but more so I sort of froze mentally. Because something that you're told when you're a Judaist, you're somebody who believes in Judaism, and you have an interest in converting to become Jewish. You want to become somebody who's a tribal Jew, a tribal Israelite. One of the things you're told, or something you're told, is that first, it's not something you have to do in order to be in good standing in Judaism. According to Judaism, it's not something you have to do in order to be in good standing with God. You can live as a righteous Gentile according to Judaism. You don't have to become Jewish. And secondly, they tell you that you don't want to become Jewish. They discourage it because there are, in fact, a lot of negatives that come with being a Jew, and there is suffering you will have to endure. And with this being in my mind, I had thought that day I had gone there out of interest in converting. I had wanted to be a Jew, and so that was the sort of suffering I would have to deal with if I wanted to be a Jew. So I had shifted from survival instinct to almost an existential question of, if I walk out of here, is it because I don't really want to be Jewish? And do I really want to be Jewish? Is this something I really want to deal with? And in my mind, I had quickly come to the conclusion that yes, I do want to be Jewish. Yes, even though I know there's going to be suffering I will face for that identity, it's something I want. And so I went back into the sanctuary, and the security Jew, the Jew and head of security, who was wearing a cowboy hat, I went to him first because he was sitting relatively near to me. I had gotten closer to him than I was before. And, I just went up to him and I said, he's counting us, right? I sort of whispered this. And he just said to me that, yes, he knows, and he's had his eye on him the entire time, and he's had his hand on his concealed firearm the entire time. And that was something that gave me a lot of comfort. It comforted me and it gave me a sense of security, but I was still frightened. Something else he said is that, he miscounted, because the man had miscounted. There were only, I believe, 7 people in the room, and he had counted 9. I'm not sure if this indicated that he had some kind of mental illness. I don't know. He may have just genuinely counted wrong, but there were not, in fact, 9 people in that room, and it was pointed out to me that he had counted it wrong. To me, though, I wasn't sure whether that meant I was in more danger or less danger. The fact that he was possibly mentally ill, not that we could confirm that. I remember after a little while longer of him just sort of being there, acting like he owned the place, he shouted out that he was coming back, and then he just left. And I had the fear that he was going to come back with a gun, and for the rest of the service, I thought that he was going to come back with a gun, and it just didn't happen. I never saw him again. And so the service ended, and the congregation sort of discussed what had happened. The service had gone on as normal. It ended as normal. And I went to the rabbi and I asked about converting, and I began that process. And, something that infuriates me, and something that makes me more uncomfortable and makes me feel more insecure than that moment, is the existing rising anti-Semitism in the Western conversation. There are a ridiculous amount of lies and anti-intellectual pride which is permeating the Western conversation. I'm an introverted middle-class white boy who used to spend time on political forums when I was a preteen and a teenager. I used to speak to people who were on the fringe and who believed things that aren't on fringe internet forums anymore. It's now subcultural among youth conservatives. And that's just something, it's like I don't even feel like I understand fully how it happened. There were things that you used to have to go to niche online forums to find talking points and certain lies and stuff of that nature. But now, it's subcultural among the youth conservative movement. You don't have to go on small Discord servers. You don't have to go on 4chan. You can find it on Instagram. You can find it in real life if you walk outside. And, two instances that, something that it really bothers me more than the incident itself is I've had two separate individuals who accused me of fabricating that story and who accused me of being zogged. I was doing Israeli propaganda and damage control because I told a real incident in which I was afraid because I was socially labeled a Jew. Something which, by the way, happened long before October 7th. It was September 24th, 2022. That is months, a long time before October 7th, 2023. And it is undeniable. I cannot deny it. It doesn't matter to me. And it doesn't matter logically if you're an anti-Zionist, if you're a Zionist, if you're agnostic on the issue. Your actual perception and judgment of the situation in the Israeli-Palestine conflict does not matter, insofar as it is objectively true that the Western conversation about Israel is directly tied to rising anti-Semitism, rising anti-Semitic sentiment and hatred. That is just objectively true. You could be the most critical person of Israel in the world, and you could recognize that hateful, anti-intellectual anti-Semitism is increasing in direct correlation, not indirect correlation, but direct correlation to the Western Israel conversation. It's not just people on the internet anymore. It's people I went to school with. It's people in my community. It's my family coming to be exposed to just these talking points that used to be hidden. And it's disheartening and it's frightening. It really is frightening to me. I can bring up how Nick Fuentes, he's told his followers, his groypers, that they need to conceal their power level. They need to conceal their true beliefs about Jews and about Israel. They need to conceal them, and they need to infiltrate American institutions. They need to get into the military, into politics, into your clinics, into all of the socially authoritative institutions, into your churches. They need to infiltrate, and they need to steer society towards their groyper vision. Their absolutely idiotic vision. And they'll justify this to you. I've had it justified to me before, saying, well, it's justified for groypers to infiltrate because Jews infiltrate. And it is just such nonsense to even utter such words. Am I an infiltrator? Which Jew in my community is an infiltrator? Are we spies? Are we spies? Was that man right to call us spies? Are we spies for Israel? Which person in my community is the delegate to steer America? Which one is the delegate of Mossad to keep tabs on America and make sure it doesn't stray too far from the chain? Which one of us is a spy? You know, I think there are a lot of good faith people out there. You know, there are some people who are just anti-intellectual and prideful, and they will believe something because it is trending and it is more socially acceptable for them to believe it. They want to believe it. It gives them some sort of sense of psychological power, and I understand it. I'm a disaffected, isolated young person. I don't have a job. I've been trying to get a job. I understand that liberalism doesn't offer you a way to live, but it does, however much you can criticize it, protect pluralism. It doesn't matter what community you're a part of, you are protected. And you going against liberalism, not in where it genuinely goes wrong, but in where it protects people just so that you can get a shallow sense of meaning, is despicable. You can parade it around as a righteous nationalism. You can parade it around as a righteous Christianity, but there is nothing Christian about it, and there is nothing uplifting your own people by demeaning and lying about another people. And you know, I think I've said all I can say on this topic, and it's because I'm not intending to make a video essay out of this video. I'm bearing a testimony in this video. I would like to say, because I didn't mention earlier, that I am, in fact, a Christian yet again. I have reverted to Christianity. I am justified and glorified by Christ alone. He is my Savior. He is all I have in this life. But that is not to the detriment of my Jewish identity. I am a Jew. I am a Jewish Christian. And I would say that if you're a good faith individual, if you aren't somebody who is pridefully just adhering to lies about Jews, and you just feel like maybe there's some perspective that you don't have, or if you're willing to hear things out, there are videos out there I would direct you to. First off, Jewboi. Jewboi makes incredible videos refuting lies about the Talmud and about Judaism. If you go out there searching on YouTube, you can find a lot of videos with millions of views that lie about what Judaism teaches and that lie about what the traditional rabbinical literature of Judaism says. And I'm not asking you to go to a yeshiva I'm not asking you to go to rabbinical school. I'm not asking you to steep yourself in a deep study of Jewish theology. I am asking you something very simple, which is to engage with the basic reality. You know, how do Jews respond to this? Jewboi has great videos where he just reacts to lies about Jews, and he just sits there and he takes it all in and he says, no, this doesn't make any sense for this reason, for that reason. You can join a Jewish Discord server. You know, talk to a Jew. Spend 30 minutes of your life going into a Discord server and asking. You know, they're not going to lie to you. They're not going to ban you or try and kick you out if you're being good faith and humble and sincere and you have a question. Go into a Jewish Discord server and say, hey, I'm concerned because the Talmud says this, and that doesn't sound right to me. I challenge you. Do it. I guarantee you'll have an answer, and you will realize that you knew less than you thought you did. Watch these Jewboi videos. I'll put them on screen. I'll link them in the description. These videos are incredibly great introductory refutations of the lies that have become a subcultural phenomenon in America's conservative movement and across the world. No Jew should have to suffer because of lies.
believe that's all I have to say.